Baseball's in a terrible spot right now, to be honest. I don't think you can ever go wrong recapturing rotation with people who have lost it. The principles of powerlifting, obviously in moderation, apply to pretty much every sport. So for us, we quickly realized that, it wasn't good enough just to be a strength and conditioning coach that happened to work with baseball players. We needed to figure out how to deliver a really comprehensive offering for them. We do some very advanced stuff. Our pitching coaches have to have access to all the data that our strength and conditioning coaches are integrating in their assessments. What's happening in baseball, you have this meteoric rise in fastball velocity. It's a steady linear trend over the last 20 plus years. And then concurrently, injury rates go right alongside of it.
All right, Eric Cressey, welcome to the show. It's been a long time since I've seen you in person. I think I maybe only met you maybe once or twice, but last time I saw you, I think was at a powerlifting meet
back
20-something years ago.
You're not kidding. Thanks for having me, guys.
Appreciate it. And then the last time I saw you was APF Senior Nationals, and that ended up being part of the film Bigger, Stronger, Faster.
That's a throwback. I think it was 2005. I know we had a really good time at the Bellagio after I bombed out of that meet. So,
Are you still deadlifting these days?
I am a little bit less after a meniscus surgery a couple of years ago. So I'm trying to be a little bit more responsible at age 43. But I still move some weight around a little bit.
So a lot of people know you from the baseball world. You work with a lot of professional athletes. Are you having these athletes also utilize some methods that you utilized in powerlifting?
Yeah, I think the principles of powerlifting, obviously in moderation, apply to pretty much every sport. You've got to get athletes strong. You've got to create adaptation, whether it's trying to put some muscle mass on guys, trying to get some endocrine benefits with, in-season training. And then obviously I talk a lot about strength's the foundation for everything, right? You can't have speed, you can't have agility, you can't have joint stability if you don't have some underlying strength. So I think a lot of those principles from my early days certainly sustain, obviously with modified approach, but no doubt about it, it impacts me every day.
Is there anything that you somewhat leave out? Some athletes don't mess with Olympic lifting at all.
Yeah.
I'm curious if there's anything that you purposefully just don't mess with when it comes to training baseball players.
Yeah, I'd say, I think the Olympic lifts are great. I don't think the juice is probably worth the squeeze in the baseball population. I think we can get a lot of the things that we need, a little bit safer, a little bit more awareness of, elbow, wrist, hand health in a population that kind of makes their money throwing a 5-ounce baseball where they have to manipulate things at a really high level here. But I think just beyond that, the carryover just wasn't quite as good as we saw with a lot of our rotational power initiatives, things like that. So I'd much rather take the time we might spend on that and, save some time, focus on, on jumping, whether it's loaded and unloaded jumping, but then throwing med balls, sprint, change of direction. There's different ways to move fast and really get the benefits. And I think the most important thing is that you have a rationale for doing it. And for us, we do a lot of force velocity profiling, a lot of force plate jumps, a lot of rotational power testing. And the biggest thing is that there's got to be carryover, and there's got to be a level of individualization that drives all of your programming.
Can you give us an idea of Cressey performance so people can understand? Because I'm not going to be able to do it justice, but a good friend, Jesse Burdick, I know that you know Jesse very well, and Jesse works with baseball players. Your facility seems extremely sophisticated. It seems like you have a lot of people that work under you. You have people that intern and that kind of get into performance through some of your teachings and some of the things you're doing. But the assessments that you guys do, I think are some next level things. You're not going to necessarily train a first baseman the same way maybe you train an outfielder and so forth. And it's not to overcomplicate things. It's to maybe address maybe these patterns that you've recognized over the years. So can you kind of give us a little bit of a view of what it'd be like to step into your facility and to work with you?
Yeah, sure. So, just for context, I finished grad school 100% thinking I was going to be a college basketball strength and conditioning coach. I was at the University of Connecticut 2003 to 2005. I was fortunate, I had some really good mentors, and I was basically in a weight room with 4 number 1 teams in the country between men's and women's basketball and men's and women's soccer, and that was kind of my wheelhouse. So, I had some opportunities to kind of go into college basketball, and there was an opportunity in the private sector that kind of came up and led me to Massachusetts, and it just so happened that some of the first players I started working with were baseball guys, and I was actually a tennis player growing up, had a bum shoulder because of that experience. So I kind of always had that upper extremity health focus in a lot of my writings and my readings and all that. And, 1 athlete became 2 athletes, and 2 became 4 became 8, and just, how it works, word of mouth spreads. And over the course of time, we built this kind of baseball empire up in Massachusetts, and eventually it led to a second facility down here in Florida where I am now. And I also work as director of player health and performance for the New York Yankees. So what it's really afforded us is just an opportunity to really build a giant sample size in baseball. And then also, to some degree, I think it's maybe similar to what you kind of saw with like what Joe DeFranco was doing in the football community, is like you're trying to find an underserved population and really give it, a higher level of individualization. So for us, we quickly realized that, it wasn't good enough just to like be a strength and conditioning coach that happened to work with baseball players. We needed to figure out how to deliver a really comprehensive offering for them. So what did that mean? It mean bringing in pitching coaches, bringing in hitting coaches. We have analysts on staff. We have massage therapists. We have physical therapists. We have kind of this built-out crew of strength and conditioning coaches, obviously as well, but people that really understand the game. So if you walked into a Cressey Sports Performance facility, for here in Palm Beach Gardens with me, obviously go through a health history, and we do a thorough evaluation, a movement screen, looking at joint range of motion, looking at some actual functional movement tests, things like that. We'd be jumping on force plates to do some force velocity profiling that way. We'd get on Proteus to do some rotational power testing. We use the 1080, for speed testing. You can right left asymmetry on sprint tests and things like that. That's a newer offering that we've rolled out. You got dynamometer testing just to look at manual muscle strength at specific joints. And then actually once you get outside and start working with some of our coaches, you get a wide variety of things that you might utilize. Obviously like a TrackMan is something that measures ball flight characteristics for pitchers and hitters. It can measure launch angle, exit velocity for hitters, things like that. But you can also look at spin rate, spin axis, all these different things that allow us to work with our pitchers. We use Edgertronic cameras. It's an $8,000 camera that looks at like pitch profiles. So if we're looking to change somebody's slider grip or something like that, it's a way to really hone in on that side of things. And then we use a markerless biomechanics setup called Fascia, which is a collection of a bunch of cameras that we can take out on the field and actually kind of bring a biomechanics lab to the athlete. I think one of the shortcomings of a lot of the tech out there is it kind of puts you in this lab environment. And I love the idea of actually getting data on guys that are in cleats, throwing off a dirt mound, even with like a kind of a fake hitter in the box, just to simulate who they really are. So we do some very advanced stuff in that regard. What I think is really important to me with respect to all that assessment stuff, though, is two things. One, it has to be a synergistic offering, meaning our pitching coaches have to have access to all the data that our strength and conditioning coaches are integrating in their assessments, right? We need to look at how they move on force plates. If a guy's at 2.6 peak velocity on a force plate, he's never going to move fast on a mound. He's just slow, weak, deconditioned. Like there's a lot of things that they just can't do with an athlete like that. Versus a guy who jumps at 3.5, like he's jump out of the gym athleticism. You can do a lot more with that guy. So I think that's vitally important. And then the second part of it is like you never want to collect data just to collect data. It always has to drive some kind of decision making. Otherwise, you're just spending money on expensive equipment for no reason. So over the course of time, like we've built out a really expansive offering that I think can serve different populations. Obviously, what we can do with our big league guys who are very, very, nuanced and experienced, in terms of what we can do with helping them to sequence and, generate scouting reports for how they're going to attack opposing lineups. It gets more and more advanced when you go from the 12 or 13-year-old kid all the way up into the more advanced athlete. But big picture, we're actually going through a big renovation right now. Our Florida facility is going to be a 19,000 square foot training facility plus a 12,000 square foot baseball operations building. We have a full-size stadium, 100 yards of turf right next to it. So it's kind of like our own little spring training complex here in the paradise of Palm Beach Gardens, Florida.
That's incredible. I just want to, it's good to paint that picture for the audience and then say, okay, this is how it pertains to you, because a lot of them don't have multi-million-dollar arms, right?
Yeah.
It's probably a little frustrating. I know you're a very positive guy. It's probably a little frustrating sometimes to see like on Instagram or some of these things where these are 3 things you can do for your shoulder, and you're like, oh my God, there's like 19,000 things that you could do for your shoulder that could be helpful, and sometimes it's hard to assess and it's hard to just give information to the masses like that. But what are some things that maybe have shocked you or surprised you when somebody does have a shoulder injury and you worked on maybe other areas? Maybe you worked on an oblique or a hip or a quad or something like that, and it had really upstream benefit to the shoulder.
Yeah, I mean, I think, especially, kind of, we talked about powerlifting a little bit before. I don't think you can ever go wrong, and this isn't just shoulder related, this is everything. I don't think you can ever go wrong recapturing rotation with people who have lost it, right? Like, all of us at one point or another were, 14, 15-year-old athletes playing multiple sports, like changing direction, sprinting, like we were going through a wide variety of activities and being athletic. And I think over the course of time, like the quest to get bigger and stronger, and lots of classic bilateral exercises, and usually happens alongside the time when we just stop doing as many like pure athletic things. We don't play ultimate frisbee with our buddies, like we don't play tag as kids. I think we see a lot of people who just lose rotational capacity, right? So that's not just shoulder internal and external rotation. That's thoracic spine rotation. That's cervical rotation. That's hip rotation. Even like tibial internal rotation. And I think you see a lot of people as they lose that, they kind of just become cement blocks, and they don't have arm swing when they walk and things like that. So I think when I evaluate a lot of athletes, really anybody, that's something I'm looking at. Is like what range of motion was there that they lost as a negative outcome from the training process. There are different ways to attack it. I think Bill Hartman's done some really cool stuff with his model, talking a lot about wide versus narrow infrasternal angles, and I think we've probably seen a lot of these like narrow ISA athletes, kind of your 6'3", 185-pound like triple jumpers, elite. Shooting guards who are just really, really athletic. And, we put them in a weight room for 5 years, and we took away some of their superpowers and made them a little bit too stiff. And, I think at the other end of the spectrum, we have the guys that were built square that are meant to be, NFL offensive linemen and fullbacks who thrive on that side of things. So it's all about, working with whatever athlete's in front of you. But, specific to the shoulder, if you can recapture some rotation, I think it goes a long way, because in many cases, you're just giving people more degrees of freedom to be successful, right? Like more ways that you can reach to the back seat and hand your kid a drink while you're driving, or put your seatbelt on, when you're just trying to find motion wherever you can get it.
And Eric, I kind of want to get into a little bit of detail of what you mentioned in terms of losing that rotational ability, because I think one thing that a lot of people mention is like, okay, you know what, if you can lift, but then you can maintain some activity that allows you these athletic rotational outputs. That's the key, right? Yeah. Because I think some people think that it's a myth that if you are doing these sagittal plane movements over and over time, they think that, no, that doesn't make you less athletic. That makes you bigger, stronger, faster, right? So in what context does this happen to people so people can really understand what you're saying?
I think it's a bell curve, right? There's like this point of diminishing returns. I always tell the story, like we see these like, I use the example, like 6'3", 180-pound pitcher, right? High school kid who's, throwing 86, 88 miles an hour. And he's, most athletic kid in high school, goes to play Division I baseball, right? And what happens? Freshman year, he puts on 25 pounds, fills out, big upper back, basically his butt and hamstrings and quads get a bunch bigger. And, all of a sudden he's throwing 90 to 92. So everybody's happy. There's a great outcome there. And then obviously the window of adaptation gets a little bit smaller for a guy like that. So, sophomore year, maybe it's 92, 93. And then often like junior year, that same kid's got low back pain. He regresses, struggles with his delivery, just can't seem to find his way. And in many cases, it's just because they gave him too much of a good thing, right? And I think those athletes sometimes start to have, consequences that go with it. So we need to make sure that anytime we add, a lot of conventional lifting, stuff like that, we got to, pair it with the right mobility exercises. We got to pair it with, things that expose them to a wide variety of activities, keep throwing med balls, keep changing direction, keep doing all those things that made you successful in the first place. And to be honest, like pro baseball has been very eye-opening for me. This is, kind of a sidetrack to it. But I think when we evaluate baseball players, we've always been, kind of tricked into thinking that like high school players always have the biggest window of adaptation, right? Because they haven't had good nutrition and good training. Like I've been stunned at some of the crazy improvements that we've seen in college players that we've been around in professional baseball. The 21-year-old guys who literally dropped like 15 pounds of body fat and put on 15 pounds of muscle mass in the first year. Like we have, DEXA scans and things like that that'll blow your mind. Like the force plate qualities, jump off the page at you and you're like, holy cow, did you just like skip lifting and just like live in the cafeteria for the last 3 years at that ACC or SEC school you were at? So I think there are times, honestly, where bad training is worse than no training at all. Like sometimes if we left an athlete alone, he was going to self-organize pretty darn well and make himself into a first rounder, and the training process actually got in the way. With that said, though, there are some like really, really good, guys out there that are doing an awesome job, with blending the two, right? You get like a Rick Franzbaugh at Clemson, great strength and conditioning coach, super in tune with all this stuff. Like he gets his guys strong, but they're still really good movers, great rotators. So there are people that are like, figuring things out and delivering, good comprehensive offerings to their athletes.
I will never go to a doctor ever again about my general health. All they want to do is put you on pills.
Really well said there by Dana White. Couldn't agree with him more. A lot of us are just trying to get jacked and tan. A lot of us just want to look good, feel good. And a lot of the symptoms that we might acquire as we get older, some of the things that we might have, high cholesterol or these various things, it's amazing to have somebody looking at your blood work as you're going through the process, as you're trying to become a better athlete, somebody that knows what they're doing. They can look at your cholesterol. They can look at the various markers that you have, and they can kind of see where you're at, and they can help guide you through that.
And there's a few aspects too where it's like, yes, I mean, no shade to doctors, but a lot of times they do want to just stick you on medication. A lot of times there is supplementation that can help with this. At Merrick Health, these patient care coordinators are going to also look at the way you're living your lifestyle, because there's a lot of things you might be doing that if you just adjust that, boom, you could be at the right levels, including working with your testosterone.
And there's so many people that I know that are looking for, they're like, hey, should I do that? They're very curious. And they think that testosterone is going to all of a sudden kind of turn them into the Hulk. But that's not really what happens. It can be something that can be really great for your health, because you can just basically live your life a little stronger, just like you were maybe in your 20s and 30s.
And this is the last thing to keep in mind, guys. When you get your blood work done at a hospital, they're just looking at like these minimum levels. At Merrick Health, they try to bring you up to ideal levels for everything you're working with. Whereas if you go into a hospital and you have 300 nanograms per deciliter of test, you're good, bro, even though you're probably feeling like shit. At Merrick Health, they're going to try to figure out what things you can do in terms of your lifestyle, and if you're a candidate, potentially TRT. So these are things to pay attention to get you to your best self.
And what I love about it is a little bit of the back and forth that you get with the patient care coordinator. They're dissecting your blood work. It's not like you just get this email back and it's just like, hey, try these 5 things. Somebody's actually on the phone with you, going over every step and what you should do. Sometimes it's supplementation, sometimes it's TRT, and sometimes it's simply just some lifestyle habit changes.
All right, guys, if you want to get your blood work checked and also get professional help from people who are going to be able to get you towards your best levels, head to merrickhealth.com and use code POWERPROJECT for 10% off any panel of your choice.
It was a while back, but I tweaked my shoulder quite a bit, and it was one of the annoying things that I couldn't quite figure out. And I did some myofascial release and a bunch of other things for it, and nothing was really working. And then I decided to throw a 4-pound and a 6-pound med ball. And I noticed I could throw the med ball really well. Like I could throw it really well. And I was like, that's really weird. How am I able to throw this, but I can barely raise my arm over my head? And I certainly wouldn't have been able to throw like a baseball or something, like a wiffle ball or something would have killed me. Why is that so? Like, why can you get almost like a recovery response from trying to move something heavier?
Yeah, I think for sure. As a good rule of thumb, the lighter the implement, the faster you're going to move. So, a guy like you, everyone has the example, like go and try to throw a tennis ball versus a baseball. Like you kind of guard. The tennis ball should move faster, and the last thing you want to do is let it go and have your arm go flying off your body at the same time. So I do think to some degree, like that's one of the beautiful things about med balls is you can train them with crazy frequency. Like I'm always amazed that we can like have guys that, get after it with med balls, 4+ days a week, and it doesn't seem to beat them up, versus if I had them go out and try to throw a 5-ounce baseball, 95 every day with the same kind of intensity, like it would beat them up quite a bit. But I think you touched on another really important topic, is like the role for manual therapy. I mean, it's been on cave paintings for 4,000 to 5,000 years for a reason. Like massage works. I think there are a lot of people out there who like to argue on the internet about whether it works and what kind is better and all that stuff. It's like it's probably different for everybody. Like I don't feel very much better if I dry needle, but if you throw a cup on me and just drag it, I feel like $1,000,000 for a couple weeks. And I think everybody's a little bit different in how they respond. And, we're starting to get more and more, I think, good research. Like Sue Falsone's presented on some really good stuff that just looks at like kind of how fascial layers are gliding pre and post treatment. So like to your point, like you've lifted some really heavy stuff over the years, right? You're very dense. Like it's very different than someone who just bodybuilded for a long time and maybe just hasn't had like the same kind of density of their tissues. So you're probably a guy who, got some stuff gliding just a little bit better. You're able to like tap into that fascial system a little bit better and, be a little bit more elastic instead of just trying to muscle through everything.
Okay, Eric, man, it's all the things that you mentioned are really cool, especially the fascial aspect of it, because right now there seems to be you probably don't pay much attention to social media, which is probably a great thing. But there is a fight between two sects of coaches on social media. There's these coaches that are coming out sharing a lot of information on improving your fascia to improve your movement. And then there are coaches on the more traditional side of things who are saying, there's no research to back any of this up. This is woo-woo stuff. You can't train your fascia. Even myofascial release and that type of work is woo-woo and there's no research behind it. And I think when people are seeing this stuff, they're seeing the benefits that these fascial coaches are finding, and they're seeing all these before and afters of movement, and they're like, well, I see something here, but this coach says there's no research and fascia's a myth. So from you practicing this stuff, seeing this stuff in action, what do you take away from it so far about the fascial side of things and maybe its importance, or what's overblown?
Yeah, I think number one takeaway is that there are a lot of people who like to argue on the internet, right? Like
Yeah.
they'll find anything. It's like, hey, people feel better, like especially if you get a good manual therapist, like that has a good diagnostic capability. Here's what I can tell you. I mean, I've seen scenarios of people who have gone through, months and months of failed rehab for a bum shoulder, and somebody throws one dry needle in an infraspinatus and their pain goes away after, being told they needed surgeries and all this stuff. Like obviously that's an extreme example, but there's a whole lot about the body that we don't know. I remember Thomas Myers, who wrote Anatomy Trains, super bright guy in this world, back in 2008 or 9 when I saw him talk, he said we probably know about 25% of what we need to know about the fascial system. So, fast forward, well over a decade now, probably 16 years, like maybe we know 50% right now. We're getting better diagnostic capabilities just to kind of see what actually happens pre and post treatment. But I think it's a really, really hard thing unless you've seen a large body of like people getting better with it. It does make a discernible difference. The research is also very challenging to look at with respect to massage. Like I actually remember, I can't remember which Olympics it was, but they actually showed that athletes who had more massage performed worse at the Olympics. So the initial takeaway, if you just casually hear that in conversation, is that massage makes athlete worse. But if it's not a controlled study, maybe the athletes who are already injured were seeking out massage more often. Maybe the athletes who are lazy and didn't want to put in the work to prepare were more interested in just laying on a table and getting treated every day. And then you hear stories about like a Roger Federer, like living on a massage table. He had one of the longest tennis careers you can imagine. I think it all comes down to matching the athlete to the intervention. But put it this way, I don't think that there's any debate that the fascial system plays a massive role in high performance, right? We wouldn't see so many freak athletes. Like, do you guys follow tennis at all? Like
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so we trained Riley Opelka, who's been top 20 in the world, one of the best servers of all time. He's 7 feet tall. Like watching Riley play tennis is like sitting front row at an NBA game. Like freakish athletic. Literally changed my perspective on athleticism. I sat in the coach's box at the U.S. Open. I think it was 2021, just to see it. It's like the most insane change of direction. Like. And Riley's actually a pretty impressive guy in the weight room, but his like tendons are this long. Like there's no muscle bellies on somebody that tall. Like if we're just trying to do this from a pure like muscular strength standpoint, you can't accomplish what these people do. Like look at Jacob deGrom, like throwing up 103 miles an hour at probably 175 pounds. At 6'3", 6'4". Like the amount of forces that are being imparted into these objects. It just doesn't make sense from a pure muscular strength standpoint. And it's especially fascinating because it's such a finely tuned thing, right? Like I was a little dude that deadlifted a lot of weight. Like I just got really good at being a one-trick pony. Like if you ask me to like help you move a couch, I'm probably no better than the guy like down the street, right? I just think we have athletes that understand how to really wire certain patterns. Like they've done some imaging on like javelin throwers and how their throwing shoulder adapts. There's just so much more to high performance that we can't really necessarily define that absolutely isn't there. And in the meantime, people like to get clicks.
What do you think about like partial range of motion stuff? Because I'm imagining with like a 7-footer, you might some coaches might be excited to try to teach most of these athletes mainly what they know, and then sometimes because of what they know, they're trying to have an athlete like that, do like an ass to grass squat or something like that. And I'm not saying that an ass to grass squat would be pointless for him. I'm just saying that it might be easier, especially to get to work right away, utilizing some partial range of motion work.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's more specific to the athlete than the height. I think there are times when put it this way, there's a consequence to everything, right? If you walk in and you just hinted at your shoulder stuff in the past, and you've got shoulder flexion to 80 degrees, and I asked you to go push press, it's probably not going to end well, right? Like you're going to find lumbar extension and wind up with some kind of back pain as a result, or you're just going to plow through the front of your shoulder and wind up with symptoms there. So what I would say is I've seen guys who are 7 feet tall that move brilliantly and could take a front squat and put their butt on their heels and it's pristine. Or maybe they can do it if you give them a goblet set up and you put them on a slant board and you kind of give them some kind of a modifier that allows them to reposition their center of mass a little bit better. So I just try to stay away from absolutes because I've seen athletes that you would never think can do this stuff, handle it really well. But at the end of the spectrum, I've seen woefully underprepared 13-year-old kids who should be able to do pretty much everything, who come in and they're like a newborn giraffe.
On the note of younger athletes and maybe some athletes in general, and pertaining to baseball, it seems like a sport, it takes a certain type of athleticism. So you're going to see the general avatar for baseball players is different than most football players, right? They don't necessarily all look like they're super athletic, but they are, right? So I wonder, when it comes to specificity of sport, do you think that playing or doing more different things would be better than just repetitively doing that specific sport? And I'm thinking of baseball specifically because of the amount of throwing that's involved and probably the amount of dominant side rotational throwing. And I just wonder, over years of doing that same side, what that could potentially cause.
Yeah, for sure. So, couple questions layered in there, so I'll try to hit them one by one. The first thing I'll say is that, oh no, you're good, man. It was great conversation material. I think the first thing is, early sport specialization doesn't work, right? Like outside of very specific initiatives, things like figure skating, maybe gymnastics, where athletes peak very, very early. And frankly, those are, largely just who survives and doesn't get hurt. I think for the most part, nothing matters with respect to specialization prior to puberty. Play as many different things as you possibly can until 12, 13, and then maybe you start to narrow the scope a little bit more. And the research is honestly pretty compelling on that side of things. And it's interesting because I have twin 10-year-olds and a 6-year-old, all girls, and we're kind of in this world where gymnastics is trying to force them into this one sport year-round kind of dynamic when they still like playing softball. We have one that does dance, one that's doing soccer. There's a lot of layers to it. Now that I'm a parent, I actually see it through a very different lens than just the coach who would always just rant and rave about it from afar. But in general, there are certain adaptations you do need for baseball. So one of the things that you see in a throwing shoulder, you have a growth plate at your proximal humerus right up by your shoulder, and everyone's born with tons and tons of retroversion that allows for you to lay your arm back quite a bit. And over the course of time, as we age, we just get more and more anteverted, kind of shift towards internal rotation. And what they've shown is that kids that throw in their dominant shoulder, they preserve that retroversion. So they basically warp the growth plate at the top portion of their upper arm. And what it does is it gives rise to more external rotation, so more ability to lay the arm back during the throwing motion. And it's interesting, this is kind of where the phrase throw like a girl comes from, if you really think about it. Most of the time when you hear somebody who throws like a girl, it's very pushy, the elbow is out in front of the shoulder by a lot. And it's because people don't have retroversion of their humerus. And you can actually see, if you go watch a first pitch, George Bush owned the Texas Rangers, laid his arm back pristine. Barack Obama, a basketball player, didn't have a lot of retroversion. You can see in their deliveries, they're actually very different. And they actually did a controlled study that looked at European soccer players, and they didn't have retroversion in their throwing shoulder. So the joke is, you don't throw like a girl, you throw like a a European soccer player. But the point is that you do need to do enough just to adapt. And I think what we see sometimes is when people have awkward like throwing motions, a lot of times it's because they just don't have the ability to lay their arm back because they didn't do enough younger. And it's why you don't see a lot of people like take up baseball and be very good when they're like 16 or 17 versus like, you know, you have someone that's like athletic and they go out and they just become a great wide receiver because they ran track.
So Mark, you have been loving wearing these Paluvas for a long time. Why is it that you like these shoes that look like this?
I'm trying to get my feet to be jacked. You know, I think it's funny how sometimes people will, when I wear these shoes, they're like, oh, those are different. And I'm like, well, maybe you should blame God because this is the human foot. This is the way that it looks. But Paluvas are awesome because it's going to allow you to train your feet and train your toes and allow for that toe spread because you got the 5-finger toe thing going on. It's like put on a glove for your feet. It feels amazing.
It's like walking around with toe spacers. You know, we've been working on our feet for a long time now. You always hear the benefit of people talking about like these tribes who have gone without shoes forever. And they have this toe space and have these amazing feet. And these shoes will allow you to just passively get that back by walking around.
You don't realize what a disadvantage you're at when your foot is all clumped together from the football cleats or soccer cleats or whatever else you were wearing when you were young. And so it's nice to be able to splay your toes. In addition to that, though, one thing I love about Paluva is the fact that it's not a regular barefoot shoe. I do love barefoot shoes as well, but it also has appropriate padding. And when you're stepping on some crazy pebbles and rocks and different things, like when I'm out on a run, some terrain is a little different than others. I don't have to be worried that I'm going to get some sort of stabbing, crazy thing happening to my foot because it has an appropriate amount of cushion underneath the foot.
And guys, Paluva has a lot of different styles on their website. I think one of the newest styles they just came out with, which is a little bit more of a rigorous shoe, is the Strand ATR. It's not these are the Strands, but the ATRs have a little bit more. If you want to go hiking with them, you totally can.
Those are amazing. If you go out, you know, throw those on and go sprint on a field and your feet feel so strong, grabbing the grass and being able to actually grab the ground with your foot feels amazing.
I'm more of a chill guy with my Paluva, so I like the Zen slip-ons, but that's the thing. With Paluva, there's a lot of different options. So if you head to paluva.com and use code POWERPROJECT, you'll be able to save 15% off your entire purchase. And they also have toe socks. Their 5-finger toe socks are no show, so check those out too.
What about you know, the injuries that you start to see when someone does specialize? I mean, you see that a lot with baseball.
Yeah.
I have some friends, family friends, and stuff like that, and their kid unfortunately needed like an elbow surgery, and they're like in 11th grade, you know, and it's because they started playing baseball when they were like 5 years old type thing, and they've started pitching right away and things like that.
Yeah, baseball's in a terrible spot right now, to be honest. You know, it's at all levels. Like, people hear about all the Major League Baseball players that are having a lot of injuries, but the truth is that the injury rates are astronomically higher, you know, in college and the amateur ranks. Like, they actually did a study that Pac-12 baseball injury rates went up 500%. Over, I think it was 2019 to 2024, give or take. It was a study that just came out recently. Like, insane number of injuries. You know, and not only that, they're not just more injuries; they're longer ones. They're Tommy John surgeries where you're out for 14 months. And a lot of it's just this trickle down effect of, you know, excessive sports specialization. You know, thinking you can do it faster. You know, playing way more, playing for multiple teams. But I think also it's a very never-ending quest for velocity. We see everybody just chasing and chasing and chasing the ability to throw hard, and it's more forces on the elbow and the shoulder. So I think we're seeing these problems across all sports, but they're particularly problematic in baseball. Very simply, baseball's throwing a baseball, it's 7,000 degrees of internal rotation per second. It's the fastest motion documented in sports. And, you know, it's a hinge joint that's asked to do something that it probably wasn't really made to do. Certainly not made to do, you know, 100 times every 3 hours. So I think we're seeing a lot of big problems. The tricky thing right now, though, is a lot of those young kids that were broken and overused at a really young age are now becoming your major leaguers. And the challenge is, what do you know, it used to be like, all right, your elbow, you know, gets beaten up, you have a Tommy John surgery at 31 years old that saves your career so you can pitch a few more years. Now we have Tommy John surgeries in 15-year-olds. So what happens when they're drafted at 21 and they blow it out again at 23? Like, we have guys that are on their third ligament in professional baseball now. And like, the inside of your elbow, like, that medial epicondyle is not very big. You can only drill it so many times and put in new ligaments. So we're at a really big crossroads in baseball. Like, you know, I've been very, like, adamant, very public about it, that Major League Baseball needs to intervene more, because they're celebrating the high performance and the guys throwing 100 miles an hour and all that stuff, but there's never going to be a trickle-down effect to the younger levels until they take a step back and realize that they're really just copying what all the big leaguers are doing.
How could they intervene, do you think? What are some things they could do?
I think a couple things. One, you could do a lot more in terms of like a scouting dead period to force kids to actually have periods throughout the year where they're not pitching. So I live in Jupiter, Florida. Jupiter is the single biggest underclassmen event of the year in the first 2 weeks in October. So you think about it, like Major League Baseball players are playing in the postseason when a bunch of high school kids are trying to just absolutely blow it out in front of a bunch of, college and professional scouts at the end of the year when they're coasting, like they're on fumes. So I think having like a dead period on scouting, like you shouldn't be evaluating kids in October, November, December. Like you should actually give them a period to like recharge, do their strength and conditioning work, get their arm care stuff in, and then do a gradual build up into their season. The research is pretty compelling that kids that throw over 100 innings a year have massively higher injury rates. Kids that attend showcases have massively higher injury rates. That we kind of have to protect kids from themselves. And to me, it's kind of like putting the bumpers on the gutters in the bowling alley when you're at a birthday party for kids. Like you just have to protect them from being really, really stupid. The challenge is the overwhelming majority of injuries that I see in kids, and this is really sad to say, all of them are 100% preventable. Like this isn't just like you got hit by a pitch and it broke. It was usually like an idiot that wanted to win a trophy that didn't matter. Like one of our good friends, is one street over, has 3 sons, and her middle son played in a game where like literally an 11-year-old threw 101 pitches in 6 innings to like win a trophy the other day. It's like, A, it's a problem because it's a acute stressor, on the kid, but B, you look at the box score and the kid also had like a double, a triple, stole 3 bags, all this stuff. So it's like clearly all we're doing is we're sending out the best player on the team to do everything and try to win a tournament. And so the side effect of that is that you have 15 other kids on the team who aren't coming back to play next year because they didn't get innings, they didn't get at bats. Like at that level, the only thing that matters is that kids come back and play the next year. And unfortunately, we're trying to peak kids way too early. So like, I think we need to really, really get back to Major League Baseball advocating for multi-sport participation and, and periods of like rest and recovery and honestly like prepare your body for what's ahead.
Do you think that there's anything to the idea of like movement symmetry? I asked this, like I grapple. I've been doing jiu-jitsu for a very long time, and for myself as a martial artist, there's a tendency to sweep your opponent to your dominant side after you've learned something. Yeah. So you're doing something towards one side over and over and over. Over time, I developed this lower back pain on the right side of my back that would never go away. After a while, I started doing other practices that allowed me more rotational symmetry on the left side of my body, and then soon after, that lower back pain went away. I started being able to do more stuff to my left side. Bam, right? So I'm curious, you working with rotational athletes who have dominant sides, do you think that there's anything to finding something that will allow for symmetrical amount of movement, or nah?
Yeah, I think movement variability will never lead you wrong, unless you're someone who's like woefully unprepared for it. Like, don't be an NFL offensive lineman that just goes out and plays 18 holes of golf. Like, like that's not going to work well. You're probably going to give yourself a stress fracture, right? But if you prepare yourself over the course of time, it can really work. Like, what do we see? We see a lot of people who like make a bad decision and rupture an Achilles or whatever it is because they don't gradually build up to it. But what's interesting in my world, and I deal with crazy asymmetries, is it's actually really hard to evaluate because sometimes their asymmetry is their superpower and sometimes it's a massive injury predisposition. So we'll see athletes that have like literally like 50% differences in terms of how much they break on a force plate. So they go down at the bottom of a vertical jump and they literally shift to one hip and do 50% more work on that side versus the other ones. And you're wrestling with like, all right, is this just because of this is the way that he's hit? Is this him working away from an ankle injury that was 5 years old that was never rehabilitated correctly? So you have to dig really deep. But I would say for the overwhelming majority of people they're probably going to listen to this conversation, movement variability is always going to be a good thing. It's something that'll give you the ability to do what you love to do for a longer period of time because you always want to have good strategies, right? Like maybe we feel old sometimes, but we're pretty young dudes in the grand scheme of things. Like when you're 85 and you slip on the ice, you want to have some strategies that allow you to not like, break a hip and die. So I think it's good to preserve those qualities as long as we can during our athletic careers.
How do you help people to throw faster, throw harder, swing the bat faster, and so forth, in a safe way? Like to try to, I'm sure that injuries are going to sort of happen here and there, kind of out of your control sometimes, but how do you mitigate that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is this foundation, right? Like I think everybody gets really excited about the top of the pyramid, which is like pitch design and trying to basically get on an aggressive throwing program, all that stuff. A lot of that stuff, like you can gain velocity by lifting weights and getting stronger. Body weight is predictive of velocity, right? You can get it by doing a medicine ball program. You can do it by sprinting. You can do it by jumping. You can do it by, getting more mobile. You can do it by getting healthy, like a good rehabilitation program. Like there's research that shows that just doing like rotator cuff and scapular control exercises improves velocity. Those are all like bottom tier. But what's important is when you build that broad, base to the pyramid, all the other stuff that you want to do, the sexier stuff, is really the stuff that like, it has higher risk, but if you built the foundation, you can do it easier. The one thing I will say, like nothing improves velocity better than sequencing, like understanding how to put your body in the best positions to be successful. And that's where like some of the biomechanical analysis is so powerful, but you can actually see like a guy that throws 98 side by side with a guy who throws 88, and you look at when the segments peak in terms of their velocity. And some of these athletes, they're trying really hard. Like they're racing to create early arm speed, when if their lower half did the job better, it would deliver their arm to a great position.
Yeah, or maybe the development of being able to throw some different pitches, right? Like not everything's always about just. I mean, I think I've heard, and I don't follow baseball a ton, but I think I heard maybe it was last year where they brought in like some of the suckiest pitchers on the team and intentionally had them like throw for a little bit for a couple innings because they threw quite a bit slower than the other guys, and people couldn't hit off them.
You'll see it like position players and like blowouts will come in and throw the 8th and 9th innings, and sometimes, it's 40 miles an hour, and it doesn't further. What's actually really fascinating is if you look at what's happening in baseball, you have this meteoric rise in fastball velocity. It's a steady linear trend over the last 20 plus years. And then concurrently, injury rates go right alongside of it. But you know what's wild is that fastball usage goes down. So as fastballs have gotten better and better and better, pitchers are throwing them less. Why? Because hitters have corrected. They've found opportunities to hit off machines that are throwing at elite velocities. There's a piece of technology called Traject that a lot of major league teams have, where it's like a simulator, so you can see the starting pitcher that you're facing that night and actually get like practice at bats against them. So hitters have gotten exponentially better. It's just that pitchers are always ahead, but we've guys throwing 102 to 105 miles an hour in the big leagues, and there are still hitters that can square them up. As crazy as it sounds, it doesn't happen often, but we are kind of testing the limits of what humans can safely do. So we're in a really weird time for sure.
We hear a lot of people talking about sprinting and the value of being able to sprint, or at least some capacity to sprint your body in something, like even if you get on an assault bike or something like that. That's a pretty damn good start, right? You're racing your body.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Do you think that your average person should kind of have their North Star for upper body like mobility and movement should maybe be to throw? And then maybe additionally to swing a little bit. And I'm not talking about like, throwing real fast or anything, but just a good ability, right arm, left arm, to be able to throw with some sort of decent proficiency.
Yeah, I think you should be able to do it without being super awkward. I think that goes without saying. We all did it at some point when we were younger, and it probably would be maybe indicative of having the requisite mobility it takes to do. I think for most people, throwing the med balls is probably the next best option. Like do a shot put or do a scoop toss and be relatively efficient with it. I think we should all be able to get out and play tennis, hit forehands and backhands and change direction, and actually be able to serve some of that stuff. And that requires a lot of motion in certain places. So I think it could be a decent North Star, I think, for some people, but I would never force that on people. But I would say that probably what we all do need to do is something fast, right? I'm not saying go out and sprint and like blow out a hammy today, but like some people do well with like doing more hill sprints or resisted sprinting. Some people do well with just doing kettlebell swings, and some people want to do box jumps. Like find what's right for you. But it is the big thing is that power does detrain pretty quickly if we don't work hard to preserve it. So that's something that should be a key component in your long-term success.
What about maybe some swinging? just like swinging a bat or swinging an
Yeah.
axe or swinging something.
Yeah,
Might
absolutely.
be a good idea. Or
I don't,
rotational.
yeah, I don't think it would hurt. I mean, you look at like some of the swing sticks that are out there for like, developing golf club head speed. Sledgehammers have kind of been a thing for a long time. You kind of find them in the parking lot at every powerlifting gym there is. So that stuff is definitely out there, and I think there's a place for people integrating it. Just being athletic. I think that it goes a long way.
Yeah, we have one right here, one of the swing sticks.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. This is it's like a
like clubhouse swing.
Yeah,
Yeah, amazing.
And actually, that brings me to another question because, again, it seems like when it comes to training, there is divide. There are some people that look at like kettlebells and clubs, and from the traditional sense, like that stuff's useless. You're just swinging an object through space. And on the kettlebell and club side, some people are just such purists that they think like, well, this is all you have to really do, right?
Yeah.
So, from your perspective, I don't know if you use clubs or anything with these types of athletes. I mean, I doubt it, but I don't know. But from what you know about the shoulder, the scapula, the health of those areas, what benefit do you think, or do you think like the benefits are overblown, that clubs could bring, any type of mover?
Yeah, I think there's a place for it for sure. I don't use a ton of them myself, but I do know that they are pretty popular. Like Chuck Wolf's a guy who uses them a lot in our space and everything. And we found different ways that get the job done. But I do love anything that like cyclical activities like that are understanding how to like transfer force across joints. I think that stuff goes a long way. We've kind of been in this isolationist world, I think, for a really, really long time with respect to how we program exercise. So anything that gets people moving a little bit more full body, I think it's great. And you do see people that have very like good experience with it. They talk about it that it's really changed a lot of how they move. So I could totally get behind that for a lot of people.
The way that I use methylene blue is very similar to the way that you're using it. I don't use it every day. I think things that push that button to change your mood, you might want to be a little cautious with it. In my opinion, and the feelings that I get from methylene blue, it does change my mood a little bit. It's a mood enhancer. When I go out and run, I feel like I do have a little bit more endurance. I do feel like I can breathe a little bit better, but that could also be, I've been training very hard as well, so it could be an adaptation to that as well. But as we've had, David Herrera and many other people have come on the show before, they basically just say methylene blue is a electron donor, and it allows the body to utilize energy just more efficiently. And I don't know if I can feel that per se, but I know that I feel better when I'm running, when I'm using methylene blue.
Yeah, post sessions of grappling, that's when I usually use. I use it 2 or 3 times a week. Post sessions of jiu-jitsu, I always feel like I have more energy, like much more energy than I typically have, which makes me understand that, if I did want to go for longer sessions, I could, but it also helps me understand that I'm going to be recovering better for my next session the next day, which is a big deal. But yeah, I think that if you guys, first off, this stuff is great because it's third-party tested. Methylene blue in other sources, like the stuff that you'll see on Amazon or like random websites, there's no regulation. So a lot of people have levels of toxicity from the supplement because it's not dosed correctly. And there are other things in that methylene blue. Again, this is something that is lab made. It's not, you know what I mean? So you got to be careful. And this is why we like using this stuff, because we know it's not going to mess us up.
You can go on their website. You can go on the Transcriptions website, and you can get a report of the third-party tested methylene blue and double, triple check it for yourself. In addition to that, they have the canatine, which I have not used that much, but when I have used it pre-workout, I did notice I get a zip from it. I think it has nicotine in it, along with a couple other things to go along with the methylene blue. So do yourselves a favor, check out Transcriptions, check out what they got. Strength is never weakness, weakness never strength. Catch you guys later.
Seems like you're the kind of guy that likes to just keep the playbook really open in terms of what you utilize and what you don't utilize. Doesn't seem like you have like written certain things off. It seems like you're willing to do a lot of different things. Some people talk about rotation and anti-rotation. And for some reason, like in this world, there's always like these big arguments about these things. I mean, I know some people that get in like fights over the big toe and how the big toe should work, and it's just like silly stuff. But like, I'm imagining that you stand somewhere in the middle on this, as you do with probably many other things.
I think it's funny. Like early in my career, like I probably like to die on a lot more hills than I should have. Like to argue on internet forums and things like that. And it's kind of a very eye-opening experience just to like step away from doing that, realizing how much more productive I could be if I devoted my stuff elsewhere or my attention elsewhere. Particularly, I'm a dad of 3 kids. I got a wife and, 2 facilities and, a role in Major League Baseball. So I think for me, it was a necessity to like step away from unnecessary arguments. Big picture though, I think I'm just very agnostic with respect to all methods. I think there's merit to a ton of different things. Like I try to do a lot of listening. Honestly, I try to hire people that don't like replicate me. I try to hire people that compliment me, really smart people that'll like ask good questions, challenge me on ideas I've had, that'll bring unique skills to our facility. That's something I think I've always done well, is I've just been curious. And it was born out of the fact that I was a baseball outsider. Like I only played baseball until 8th grade. I was a much better tennis and soccer player. So baseball kind of found me. So I had to do a lot more listening and ask a lot more questions. And I think it's really served me well. Plus, being honest, like I don't have like a gadget to sell. I think that sometimes like is really, really helpful. Like, nobody's making money on like isometrics. Nobody's making money on like, cable external rotations or something like that. So I think for me, it's allowed me to, to kind of take a step back and just, not really worry about aligning myself perfectly with one discipline over another.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the way that you use the cables and different things. And, I'm probably only seeing a fraction of the way that you train the athletes, but I saw like one video in particular where somebody was holding like kind of like a Pavlov press type thing, but then they were also moving their hips, and they were, and that seemed like that would be really challenging to only move your hips while you're holding, some rigidness in another area.
Yeah, I think, the other thing too is like, I don't want to say it's innovation for the sake of innovating. I will say, like, when we talk to a lot of our athletes that have been with us for an entire career, people who are, who are still here, like Tyler Kinley's a relief pitcher for the Colorado Rockies. He's actually a neighbor of mine. He was one of my first evaluations when we opened our facility in 2014, and he's still playing. Our kids are about the same ages, and they play. So we're going on like 12 off seasons together. Like when you have some of these guys that are very like aware of like what their body needs and what's worked for them, what haven't. Like when they come back to from the off season or from the season, you have a sit down discussion and you really build out a plan together. But what's always been very, I think, helpful for me is with those long term relationships, where those guys come back and they say, "Hey, that's new. Like, why are we doing that? Why is it different?" They athletes recognize it. Like imagine coming back and getting the same off-season program for like 10, 12 years. Like it's mind-numbing. I can't imagine having like the same career every single year. It's just like you got to have new experiences and grow and evolve. And it's really a function of being surrounded by some really awesome people that I get to work with, both at the facility and in my Yankees role.
Are there any, just because you've worked with so many college athletes, high school athletes, you see people coming in, are there any trends and maybe injury types or just like issues that you're seeing arise within a certain age group of athletes that maybe you haven't seen before?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I do think we are seeing more elaborate injuries. And the question is, are they more prevalent? Are they just being diagnosed better? Certainly like something like thoracic outlet syndrome is getting a lot more attention nowadays. Like it was kind of this mythical diagnosis that a lot of orthos didn't believe in 15 years ago. And now you realize some of these kids who had chronic ulnar nerve symptoms didn't really have an elbow issue. They had, something that was further up the chain. So we see that a lot in the baseball world. Not so much younger, that's a big one, but we're seeing way more cases, like spondy cases, lumbar spine stress fractures, just with athletes. I think because of, hyper participation and, in one specific sport, on top of maybe some questionable lifting techniques, on top of kids that are going through like normal adolescent growth spurts where, the muscles and tendons are stretching out really, really fast, the bones are stretching out fast, but the muscles and tendons can't really keep up. So yeah, I would say we are seeing a lot more spines. We're seeing more spondies, but the big one in baseball is always going to be Tommy John. More UCL reconstructions. It's scary because these used to be, like I said earlier, older injuries, and now they're happening with young kids. And it's just the function of them throwing so hard. If they're not old enough to tear a ligament, they're just having a medial epicondyle stress fracture. Or like a classic Little League elbow presentation because the bone is the path of least resistance. So it's the same problems, just at different ages, presenting a little bit differently.
Are you noticing any other strength gains from things like working the grip, or things like working your feet, or things like working your neck? Some of these kind of things that maybe some people aren't really thinking about. I'd imagine like if a baseball player, if they're working their grip, it's got to be pretty good for their being able to handle the baseball bat and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. There's a little bit of research on the grip side of things that does show some favorable benefits. Also, finger strength, believe it or not, is a big one. You think about how much force the fingers impart to the baseball for various pitches, but even beyond that, all the tendons that go down into your fingers, they actually attach on your medial epicondyle, so they cross the elbow and create some basically. I guess active stabilizers that can protect the ulnar collateral ligament during the layback phase of throwing when pitchers will often injure that elbow. So yeah, I think finger strength, grip strength, a lot of direct forearm work is kind of the new thing. One of the things that's really changed, Dr. Keith Meister is kind of at the forefront of a lot of, all things, pitching injuries right now. Probably does more Tommy Johns than anybody on the planet, particularly in higher level throwers. And he's talked a lot about how the injury mechanism has changed. In the past, everybody blew out their elbow transitioning from cocking to acceleration. And what he said is now it's happening at ball release. We have a lot of really high level pitchers who are learning to do different things with the baseball. So they're basically manipulating the baseball out front. And what it's actually creating is a situation where the flexor tendon actually is taking on a lot of the stress. So we're seeing far more flexor injuries in baseball players at the highest level. It comes alongside, the crackdown on the use of sticky substances for, being able to get better grip and all that stuff. So it's a really weird transitional time for baseball in terms of trying to find a ball that everybody can agree on, trying to figure out what level of tack is okay, and on top of that, recognizing all this is taking place while guys are trying to make a living competing at a really high level, and a lot of them are willing to take on a lot of risk in order to make money to feed their families. So baseball's in a really weird place right now.
And you got the torpedo bats,
yeah,
made famous by the Yankees.
Oh my goodness, that got so overblown. That was incredible. It's been around baseball for 3 years, but yeah, it got a lot of attention all of a sudden just because of one camera angle, I guess.
The torpedo bats.
It's just like a larger looking bat. The barrel of it is extended downward a little bit longer or something like that, right?
Yeah, you can kind of just shift the composition of a barrel. It's basically just move the wood around to different places on the bat to match up for how guys swing and where they typically make contact. But it was an interesting couple of weeks, and it's kind of gone away now. But it happened, I think, in large part because we hit a lot of home runs in one game and became front and center.
Eric, what's it like working for the Yankees? I mean, that's wild.
Amazing. Very cool experience. Obviously a storied franchise, but I always tell people the best thing about it is I get to be the dumbest person in the room every single day. It's a really cool chance to work with some really, really bright people and kind of seek out opportunities to learn and have a really supportive front office and ownership group that put us in a good position to be successful. So it's a dream come true.
With all your knowledge, all the things you learned over the years, what are some things that you still do in your training to kind of keep your joints and keep your body healthy?
Yeah, for sure. It's funny, I hinted at it a little bit earlier. So I competed, last powerlifting meet was 2008, I think it was, and then still kept just kind of training as if I was a powerlifter for a long time and never really found time to actually get to meets. But what was interesting is I, believe it or not, I tore a meniscus re-racking a weight Christmas Eve 2020. Then I went to take it off of a safety squat bar and put it on the next rack over. Little twist, heard a pop, didn't think anything of it, finished my lift, include ham raises, reverse lunges, did the versa climber, all that. Picked up sushi on the way home and got home and couldn't even move my leg when I got out of the car. So I had a pretty good sized meniscus tear that had to be repaired in January of 21. And it was interesting is rehab was all smooth. I was actually cognizant because those surgeries actually don't have a great success rate. But I got it fixed, and every time I pull over 500, my knee just talks to me. It's like, just don't be stupid, be smart. And I'm at a point, I'm 43 years old. I get a lot of things going on. Like having another surgery just doesn't work with my schedule. Not only that, like chasing a 700-pound deadlift doesn't make me more money, doesn't make my kids love me anymore, definitely doesn't make my wife happy with me. So I hate to say it, but I probably work out a lot more than I train these days. But I'm still in the gym 6 days a week. Usually lifting 4, getting out and sprinting, being athletic once, usually one like longer, like aerobic base type work. But that's probably the biggest change is adding more and more aerobic stuff as I've aged, just from a cardiovascular health standpoint. But I still lift 4 days a week, and it's classic upper lower split has really never steered me wrong. And actually trying to get back into playing a little bit of tennis. That was my sport growing up. So sneaking it in once a week if I'm lucky.
All right, and this brings me to a question that it's going to be hard to answer because you can't answer it for everyone. Everyone has different goals. But for the person that they're interested in getting stronger. They're interested in lifting weights. They're not a power lifter, right? So that's not their sport, right? But they want to see bigger and bigger numbers on the barbell with whatever they're doing. How can one think about building an adequate amount of strength safely? Because when you start really trying to get stronger and you start seeing those numbers increase, sometimes you get so tunnel vision that you just want to see 500, 600, 700. But it's like, what will that 600 and 700 bring you that the 400 maybe doesn't? Right? How do you think someone can gauge when increasing weight becomes unnecessary and it potentially becomes a hindrance?
Yeah, for sure. Your risk tolerance is a really hard thing to even talk through, just because there are going to be times when it's just not worth selling out for the dream. And I think we probably all wrestled with those moments over the course of our training career. What I can speak to, though, that never did me wrong was, I can't tell you how many times I just got in the work, even if it felt like a 4 out of 10 on the intensity scale. Like I went at one point like 8 years without missing a planned lift. Like I was a loser. I had nothing going on from age basically 20 to 28. Like it was, work or go to school and train. And I was very, very focused on it. It served me well, obviously, in the context of powerlifting and career development stuff. But I missed a lift because we got like 32 inches of snow and you literally couldn't go anywhere. So I think for me, I look back on that time and there weren't all 10 out of 10 lifts in terms of intensity and PRs and stuff like that. But I kept showing up. And it's funny, I've talked to Ben Bruno about this quite a bit, because he's got a little orthopedic history with a knee and a low back as well. And it's just like, man, if you can just consistently show up, even if it's at 50% capacity, sometimes just go through a thorough warm up. And on those days when you feel terrible, all of a sudden you never realize that obviously it becomes a 7 out of 10 lift or something like that. So that was really, really good for me. I think we probably all lifted in powerlifting gyms where like there wasn't an option to not show up. Like you'd have buddies that would be calling you out if you weren't there to bench on Friday nights and squat on Sunday mornings. Like the week was very mapped out for you, and that made a big difference for me for the couple of years that I was at Southside and after my grad degree, and I made some of my best progress in my career. So I always tell people, like, if you're looking at the long term, like, just keep showing up. And I think if you're able to do that without even knowing it, you're gonna build a little like awareness of like when to push and when not to push. I think usually the people who make really bad mistakes are kind of the novice people that are trying too hard, or they're being pushed by a culture that that tells you need to like just chase numbers at the wrong time in your training career.
Can you give us maybe some insight or a couple exercises for golfer's elbow or tennis elbow?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it definitely starts with good manual therapy. I think a lot of times we see folks they're trending in that direction. They're a little bit on the older side, and what do you see? The tendons just basically don't have the same regenerative properties they have when people are younger. So the tissue loading exceeds that tissue's tolerance for loading. So I love starting off with good quality manual therapy, particularly because it can help people get down underneath that symptomatic threshold. For some folks, that might be cupping or scraping or dry needling. There's different ways that you can kind of attack it. Active release can be great for some of that stuff too. And then after that, nothing better than a good protocol of collagen, vitamin C, and isometrics. Like Dr. Keith Barr's work is really, really compelling on that. He's done a million podcasts, so definitely a good listen. So
how does that combination work together?
Yeah,
isometrics is probably a key factor in the vitamin C and collagen, right?
What's interesting is he's introduced this concept of stress shielding. So where you basically have different portions of the tendon that have varying levels of strength. And when you see these weaker portions of the tendon, they're more degenerative. What actually happens is if you apply force really, really quickly to the tendon, the stronger portions just take it on. So you're actually not strengthening the portions that really need it. And what actually happens over the course of about 10 seconds with isometric is you actually can get basically a signal to that weaker tendon where you're actually putting some stress on it. So you're not trying to overload it like crazy. You're literally just trying to turn on some of the kind of biochemical response to basically make that tendon regenerate. Collagen and vitamin C just work synergistically to kind of support that. So using that, you take it about an hour before you actually go into the protocol. You can roll that out twice a day with some of these people. Obviously, there's some activity modification that might go alongside this, and pulling back on the amount of grip work you're doing if it's a golfer's elbow, and if it's tennis elbow, which we actually don't see a whole lot in tennis players unless they're hitting really, really bad one-handed backhands. But some of the same ideas can be there. The other thing with tennis elbow, I always tell people, make sure you get your spine looked at. A lot of the tennis elbow that we see can actually be cervical spine referred pain. So always make sure you're working from a good diagnosis. because you'd be shocked at how many people with tennis elbow actually have clean elbow MRIs.
Has there been anything like weird that's kind of thrown you off that you were kind of surprised? Like maybe having pitchers or maybe having some of the players maybe doing like curls or something like that had a good impact on helping them stay healthy?
Yeah, for sure. That's an interesting one. I don't know about necessarily like weight room things that have made, a really big difference in that world that have maybe surprised me. I can tell you there are times when I've been surprised that someone that I didn't think was remarkably athletic on paper was able to do really, really impressive things at a high level on a baseball field, right? You'd be shocked at how many guys have, 16-inch vertical jumps that are like pitching in the big leagues and throwing 95 miles an hour. So it's kind of more of like your guys who are, your bilateral beasts aren't always great rotators, and sometimes your guys who are bilateral weaklings, are very, very efficient rotationally. So I think baseball's, really made me, I guess, recalibrate on what I actually think is an athlete, quote unquote. So I think I'm more open-minded to anything and just more reflective on data than I probably ever have been before.
Some people can barely walk, and then they go out there and they play their sport, and they're amazing.
Yeah,
like, how does that
honestly,
happen?
like it's we always joke about it. Swimmers out of the pool are far and away the worst. Like, they do these incredible things, and it blows your mind, and they get out and they give them a 15-pound dumbbell for a reverse lunge and they tip over. So that's dry land training with swimmers is always entertaining.
Thank you so much for your time. They really appreciate it. Where can people find you?
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. EricCressey.com is the website. There's links to the facility there, and then all my social media is just at Eric Cressey, Instagram, and usually pretty good about responding to folks if they reach out with questions.
And it looks like you have some YouTube stuff as well.
Yeah.
And
Yep, Eric Cressey on
maybe?
YouTube. So there's tons of videos up there too on a wide variety of stuff. But appreciate you having me. It's cool to see what you guys have done with this. Definitely miss seeing you in person. Hopefully we'll catch up again in the same room at some point.
Catch you later.
Thanks, guys.